I've been thinking about something recently, and I don't really have a name for it. No big crisis, no trauma, not the obvious dramatic things that people are, allowed to complain about.
Okay, interesting. Like what?
Like, the strange, quiet frustrations that technically shouldn't matter, but somehow they take up space in your head every single day. The small things you don't feel comfortable complain about out loud because they are not real problems.
I know exactly what you mean. Then you brush them off and they accumulate, yet no one takes them seriously until it's too late. This isn't a podcast with all the answers.
It's a conversation about figuring things out as you go.
From two very different generations.
With Michelle R. Williams
and Nick Hurst.
Welcome to Life Happens. This is going to be an interesting one. Do you care to explain why?
Because we both think we're going through these kind of mini crises. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. The fact that we have so many small things that go on in our lives that we think are a crisis. And if we think they are, then actually they are. But they seem so small that you can't really go and complain to somebody else, can you? So how do you deal with it?
I mean, I complain to you, so
True.
I mean, you complain to me. And that's exactly how we found out that this is going to be a bit personal, because we had this episode and this topic planned for weeks now because we plan ahead. And so it was always there. And earlier this week, when we were about to debate this episode, we both literally started it with complaining about our lives and being like, oh my gosh, I have a crisis. And then we realized what the topic is. And so the timing is either absolutely perfect or absolutely terrible because it hits personal this time.
So what's your mini crisis going on at the moment?
Oh my gosh, my mini crisis. Well, mostly things about moving to Ireland, because a few months ago I would think that by now I would already be there, and clearly I'm not. And first of all, it's a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of, small things to do, and it's just like so much, and the process is quite long. But also, unfortunately, a huge obstacle in it is my mental health and, the little traumas that one is carrying with them after certain things that happened in their life. So not only the process itself has many obstacles, but my own head is creating new and new and new obstacles. So, these are all these many things that just make it a bit more complicated. But, I am realizing just now how I'm talking about it. And do you see how I'm downplaying it? How I can't really tell you like a proper example of what's going on? That's exactly it. Because if someone asks you and you can feel like your life is falling apart, but then someone asks you and you can't really give an example and you downplay it. And I wonder if it's because, I don't know what is it. I don't know what's the reason. Maybe because I feel like it's not important, or maybe it's hard to vocalize it and to actually put it into words. Because if, I went through a breakup or my dog died or something like that, it would be easy to explain it. Like, oh yeah, I'm going through a breakup, but I'm not. And technically nothing bad is happening in my life, but I feel like my life is falling apart, but I don't really have an explanation for it. So that's exactly it. What's your soft crisis?
Soft crisis. That's the expression. Mine is, I don't think it's as serious, if you like, as yours. I mean, it's not a question of mental health. It's a question of organizational ability, I think, because effectively I work for myself. So I'm in the process of writing a book, but at the same time, I've got another book that's actually been finished for quite a while and edited and edited and edited. And now I'm in the process of getting it ready for launch. And there's so much to do. And so, I mean, my soft crisis is overwhelmed. I'm just overwhelmed by all the different things that I need to do. And I like to be very organized. I like to have lists and break every problem down into its component parts and then create a list. So first of all, you do this, then you do this, then you do this, and then gradually you starting to build everything back together, and you've got order
Mm.
out of the chaos. And so that was my crisis. And then what happens is that I get overwhelmed by all these things that I need to do. So I just don't do any of them. And then I get to this
Literally.
point of beating myself up because
Hmm.
if I go through a day and I feel I haven't done something productive, then I really feel bad about that because I feel it's a day
Hmm.
wasted. So are
Yeah,
you
I'm the
agreeing with
same.
me because you recognize that in me, or you recognize that in yourself?
Both, actually, because I know that you are like that, and because I am like that, unfortunately. And it's for me, it's not if I do nothing the whole day, I feel guilty. I can do so many things. I can overwork myself, but somehow I still feel like I didn't do enough. So the feeling stays like no matter what. And I just find it a bit funny, but mostly unsettling, like you are talking about it, because bear with me, like naively, I thought that that maybe goes away with age. And clearly it doesn't. So I'm like, am I just destined to like deal with this for the rest of my life for like another 60 years? Will I just be dealing with this? That's nice. I love that.
And in some ways, yes, but in other ways, no, because some things you do get together. You do kind of solve, I think. I can't think of a single example off the top of my head.
Nice.
No. But you have this, you go through life with this illusion that everybody else has got it together and it's you're the one that hasn't. That's the problem. And it sort of relates to things that we've talked about before, about how we tend to judge ourselves against other people. I read a really nice phrase, I wrote it down about this. Are we comparing our personal behind the scenes, what we know about ourselves, to everyone else's highlights reel? In other words, people, when they're out and about socially or interacting with others, to be more technical about it, will try to show the best side of themselves, whereas we
Hmm.
don't see them behind the scenes. We don't see them when they're going. So
Yeah.
there's that kind of difference in that we are feeling ourselves that we're falling apart, and the people that we're seeing are totally confident and everything is going really well and so forth. It's kind of a bit like we were talking a few episodes ago about about memory, and how when you are remembering things, you kind of tidy up the memory. So you take out the bad bits or the bits that might make you look bad. And,
Yeah.
your memory becomes a lot more, in a broad sense, heroic. So I think there is that. So that will, make you feel that any kind of soft crisis that you're having is worse because no one else seems to be having one. But I bet they are. What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, well, my whole life is a soft crisis. So, but what you are saying, it's true because I get this a lot that people are telling me they think I'm such a confident person, and they're like, you just seem, especially on social media, like you have your life together and like you know what you're doing and you have all these plans. And I'm always like, what? Like you couldn't be more wrong. Like I doubt myself every single moment of every single day. And I just feel like my life's been falling apart since I left high school and, lost that forced structure in my life. And I'm just like, how could you think that's what my life is? But at the same time, I think that about so many other people. And then when I'm actually talking to them, and also because naturally I always end up being the therapist and people are telling me all this ugly stuff when I'm around, I'm finding out that, I'm not the only one and everyone feels like it. And, we all have these little things that we can't really complain about because I think it's also like something we grew up with, that we've been told that other people have it worse. And therefore, I don't know about others, but I still have it in my head. Every time I want to complain, for example, to my mom about something, that I have a terrible day, and she comes home from work and I'm like, I can't complain because she's getting up at 4 a.m. to go to work and she's just been working for 8 hours. I can't really complain about, me being overwhelmed because of this podcast or something else, because it just feels like it's not important compared to other people. But as you said, then you just have these little things put together and suddenly it's a crisis. I call it, the death from hundreds and thousands of paper cuts, because eventually you will bleed out and eventually you will die, even though it's a small paper cut. But if there are thousands of them, it's same as if it was a huge wound, so.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned to me before something called microstress, which I quite liked. Do you want to explain that? Because I think that's kind of where you were going with the death by a thousand cuts simile,
Yeah,
for example.
yeah. That's sort of the more professional or official name for these things, microstresses, when obviously typical stressors are something big, but microstresses are everything from an uncomfortable email to terrible traffic to, someone around you arguing, even though it has nothing to do with you, but you still get the energy from it, and so on and so on. And these everyday things are microstresses, then on its own can't really ruin your day, or can't really, because the traffic is terrible, you can't come to work or home and be like, oh, my day was just terrible because of the traffic. That's usually, people will be like, come on, it was like 20 minutes. Like, you can't complain about that. That just happens. But if you have so many of these micro stresses, they accumulate and then they become a huge problem if you don't really care about them. But I also think it's something that so many people are not really aware of and don't really take as a real problem.
Yeah. So what you're saying there is that you have enough of these micro stresses that it actually adds up to being more harmful than like some of the major life events that will stress you
Yeah,
out, like
yeah.
bereavement or some natural disaster that befalls you or something like that.
I also think, and obviously, I don't want to make these serious situations sounds light, like going through a breakup or getting fired or grieving someone or something. These are all valid and very serious things. But I feel like we naturally know how to deal with them. Like you kind of know how to handle a breakup. Obviously you will fall apart, you will cry, and so on and so on. But I feel like we are told, even by other people, how to deal with that. Like, you will get your heart broken at least once in your life. Like, if you didn't, I mean, where do you live? I want to live there as well. And you see all these people talking about it, and your friends are going through breakups, maybe your parents are divorced. So you kind of see how the situation unfolds when it happens, but no one really talks to you about these everyday things. I mean, for me, I feel like my generation does that. I feel like lately I am aware of these things, and even on social media, I feel like my generation is more like, yeah, let's share even the ugly parts of life and we don't lie that much. And these things are talked about. Growing up, I never thought that, like, I don't know, my mom was sad one day. And for me, I immediately went like, oh my gosh, something must have happened, something big. Someone died or she got into argument with my dad. Something had to happen. But she just had a hard day because, of so many of these little things. And I don't think it was ever explained to me that that happens and that everyone is going through it. And therefore, I didn't really know how to work with it until I sort of did the research myself and until I realized, oh, that's a normal part of life. But no one really warns you, which I'm coming back to our episode 20, the one before that, when we were talking about things no one warns you about, micro stresses.
That is true. It's one of those things because the major life events, we know how to deal with them, or at least there are kind of accepted methods that you can sort of tap into. And the other thing I
Yeah.
think is that when you going through one of these major stresses, other people are aware of it and will be sympathetic to you and empathetic and there to help if required or necessary or wanted.
Yeah.
Whereas, if you've just had a bad day, you got stuck in traffic and you're ranting about it, or somebody just cut you up on the street or whatever, it's not such a big deal. And you probably will rant about it to your nearest and dearest until they're thoroughly sick of hearing about it. You mentioned earlier that you said it feels a bit depressing to know that when you get older, these things don't go away. One of the things that does happen to you, I think it's the wisdom of being old, is that
Mhm.
I've reached a point because and as you know, I can get quite angry about stuff and rant
Mhm.
about it and shout at people and so on and so forth. But I've reached a point where I made a very sort of definite decision that I will not get upset about things that I can't control because what's the point? It's
Yeah.
I'm only harming myself. There's nothing that I can do to change a traffic jam. If I'm stuck in traffic, so I have music on in the car, I'll just relax and ignore it. It's irritating. And if it's going to make me late for something, that will really irritate me because I hate to be late. But there's nothing I can do about it. So
Yeah.
I shouldn't allow it to take minutes off my life by expending my energy in stress. I mean, if there's something I can do about something, then yeah, then I will try and do it and stress about it and stress about it if I don't try to fix something. But if there's
Mhm.
nothing you can do about it, I really feel
Yeah.
you need to try and have that mental attitude that I'm just going to stay calm because I can't anything.
I wish I could. Really? I mean, I try doing that, when especially when it's like other people lately. Basically, since I came back from America, I'm like, yeah, your problems are not my problems, especially in my family. I'm like, I have my own problems and there is nothing I can do about your problem. So I'm trying to have this attitude, or like, especially with strangers or like, things outside, I'm just like, F them and just move on. But for me, a lot of these micro stressors really come from mental health. And then it's like such a weird combination of things that you can't really change because, if you are dealing with something, sometimes your mind is doing things you don't want it to do, and there's nothing you can do about it, on spot. And so, like when I'm anxious because I'm dealing with anxiety, and so when I'm anxious about something, I can be like, it's none of my business. I shouldn't be anxious about it. But at the same time, unfortunately, that's not how it works. So I'm still anxious about it. And then I'm like, then it is my problem because it's within me, which stresses me even more. So it's this, infinite circle
Mm, mm.
that you cannot always influence.
You mentioned earlier social media, which of course wasn't a thing in my youth. And when I was your age, if somebody had talked to me about or described social media as it is now, I'd have thought they were reading from a science fiction book. But is social media and the fact that we're kind of putting out our lives on display, is it creating a feeling of being slightly behind because people will put out their best selves on social media, the kind of things I see, because I'm an old guy, I use Facebook. I know that you don't, but I do. And so I'm forever seeing people putting out that here I am in some exotic part of the world or some great restaurant or something, and constantly seeing these kind of posts or just basically saying, look, I'm having such a great life. And are you? Are you though? Or is that just what you want us to think? So maybe I'm just
Yeah.
being horribly cynical. But I just wonder, is social media creating an extra pressure? Spoiler alert, I think it is.
Yeah, of course. But like again, I feel like my generation already went through like the worst part of social media or the worst period of social media when it all started and people thought that everything on social media is right. And I feel like nowadays we are being very doubtful about it. And, or maybe it's just me. I like to say that I have a healthy relationship with social media because I know that it's not true. And funnily enough, I even see it on my own Instagram. You know, when I look at my own Instagram, I'm like, who is this girl? Like, that's not how it looks. You know, because I use my personal Instagram a lot and I use it like my own photo album basically and for my own memories. But obviously, I'm just posting the highlights, you know? And especially when I look at pictures from America, when I was basically posting this sort of like month dump every single month and I just picked, you know, highlights of the month. I can't really look at these pictures nowadays because I know the behind the scene. And, you know, if I saw it on someone else's Instagram, I would be like, wow, that's so great. She moved to America and she has so much free time to work on her book, you know, 10 a.m. and she's sitting in a cafe and so on and so on. But when I look at the picture, I'm like, yeah, it was a terrible day. I cried 5 times. I was so stressed and overworked. I didn't eat anything that day because I was just feeling terrible. And going to have a coffee and work on my book was the only reason why I didn't fall apart that day. You know, and I see these things and logically I'm like, if that's my case, surely I'm not the only one. You know, probably everyone has that or most of people. So I think that my relationship with social media is a bit better in that way, but it can be like, so there can be so many hidden micro stresses and so many things that might, you know, trigger different parts of you. Like if I again give a personal example, one of the things that I'm currently dealing with is sort of memories of when I was in America, and you know, a huge part of it was amazing, but a huge part of it was also very hard and sort of traumatic to me. And I am not really ready to confront that yet. So, you know, it's in the back of my mind. I know about it, but I'm like, you know, not now. And then I open Instagram and I see all these ads for this agency that I went with telling, you know, young girls being like, oh my gosh, be an au pair in America. It will be the best time of your life, this and that. And they are advertising it in a way that I know is not true. And it is triggering for me. And it adds to all of these micro stresses that I already have. So I think that if I wasn't on social media at all, my life would be better. But unfortunately, I don't think it's the reality in my generation nowadays. And especially when, you know, I'm doing things that I'm doing. And you know that as well. You are writing a book, you need to promote it, you need to be on social media. So nowadays it's really hard not to be on social media.
You actually had another phrase I particularly liked. All these little micro stresses. It's like having millions of tabs open in your brain at the same time, and that's exactly how I feel. That really, really sums it
Yeah.
up. But
And I think it's especially for people with different attention issues, which alert you are. So I know
well,
you
I
can
am an
relate.
attention issue.
At this point, yes, you all are just like, yes, all of you is an attention issue at this point.
Okay.
I know better than anyone. But it is, and sometimes it feels like it, and you just wish you could close them. You know, I'm that type of person when I'm overwhelmed. How, you know, sort of at the end of the day when I've been working on my computer all day and I have podcast tabs and my book tabs and emails and so on and so on, I need to close every single one manually before I can go and relax. And for me, that's the closure. But I can't do that in my head. And I wish I could, because sometimes I'm like, you know, as I was just saying, I'm not ready to confront this issue in my head. I wish I could just close it. And when I'm ready or when I need it, open it again. But that's not how it works. And it's taken so much space and it's still there.
I am just the same. I know when I come to sort of finish working, you know, when I'm having a productive day, and there will be so many tabs open at the laptop, plus, of course, so many Word folders that I'm writing in and making notes, and of course, the main manuscript and whatever it is I'm doing at that time. And then it sort of gets to the point where, apart from anything else, I feel that I can almost hear my laptop creaking and going, please close some of these tabs. You're overloading me. And, if we're doing that to our
Literally.
laptop, what the hell are we doing to our brains?
Exactly the same. And our brains are screaming at us to close some of the tabs, and then you sort of can feel it when it gets too much. You feel it physically, because mental health is connected to physical health a lot. And for me lately, I can't really sleep. I don't really sleep well, and I'm exhausted all the time. And my mom is always like, aren't you sick? Like, do you want to go to doctors? I'm like, Mom, it's not physical, it's the mental load that is just showing in different way because I've been ignoring it for such a long time. So, and that was another point I wanted to get to, because you mentioned that people understand when you go through some big life crisis, but when you go through these small ones, they don't really care, or they don't really acknowledge it, or you don't really acknowledge it, to be fair. But eventually, after all of these micro stresses and all of these little things, you get to the point when other people can tell, but then you don't really have any excuse, or like, not excuse, but when someone can finally see that you are not doing well, and then they ask you what's happening. If you just went through a breakup, you're like, yeah, I went through a breakup, and it's understandable. But then if you are just suppressing all these things for so long, and suddenly after months, someone asks you what happened, what's going on, you don't really know what to say, because it's million things. You can't tell them every single one. You don't even remember every single one, or you are not aware of every single one. But if you just choose one, it's not valid. You know what I'm saying? It's not that big of a deal for you to look this way.
Yeah, good point. I'll tell you something that can help make you feel good.
Tell me, please.
Well, not
I
you,
need that.
but if you're listening to this podcast or watching it, just take a moment, breathe, and give us a like and subscribe, and then feel good for the joy that you're spreading to us and others who will discover this podcast. So just take that moment and breathe. And we're back. Do hobbies help you cope with stress, or do they create more stress? Do you have a hobby? Or, because going back to the social media thing, do people now think being on social media is a hobby in itself?
I don't think I would call it a hobby. I wouldn't use the word, but if you say like, what are you doing in your free time? It's definitely part of it. And, people do spend time on social media to ignore what's in their head. I know what I'm talking about, to be fair. But back to your question, I don't know, because like, obviously, my hobbies right now, writing, doing the podcast, and so on and so on. But very recently, I realized, and I told you like 2 days ago, that I realized that all of these hobbies are reasons for me not to focus on the main problem. Because I realized that every time I started writing a book, it was when I was trying to ignore something. With the last 3 books that I was working on, every single time I started it when my life was falling apart and when I was ignoring what was happening around me, I started a book. Very similar thing with this podcast, I would say, because the idea came up when I was still in America and everything started falling apart. I was like, yeah, let's ignore that. Let's start a podcast. And, it's been with me through this transition and, for the past few months that weren't the easiest for me and still aren't. So I'm sort of like, is it a good thing or a bad thing? Because at the end of the day, I have a book, I have a podcast, and, that's a good thing. It's better than if I was just scrolling on social media. I at least have something. But then I'm stressing about that. I'm like, oh my gosh, an episode needs to go out and I need to edit it and I need to do social media. And, I need to start writing this book, but I'm also working on this book. And it's stressing me out like every single day. And when I go a day without writing a single word, I feel guilty and I feel bad. So maybe it's not good for me, but like at the same time it is, and I love it. So I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I just can't enjoy something without being anxious and feeling guilty about it. Maybe it's just me issue.
Well, it's the thing that all well, this is sort of a paraphrase of a quote. All great art comes from conflict. And I'm attributing
Yeah.
that to the great Irish poet W.B. Yeats, who wrote extensively in his poetry about this, about how conflict creates art. So if you're just cruising along in life and everything's fine, you're unlikely to create anything fantastic. Think of great songs. They're often about breakups and emotional moments. That's again the example. So you go through the bad things in life and then you use the energy that creates to express something. And if you're an artist or a musician or whatever, a writer, that will feed your creativity. So there is that. On the other side, talking about hobbies, you made me think of a couple of things. First of all, there are hobbies that you can do that are so intense and involve your brain so much that it banishes everything else that's worrying you. I think one thing
Exactly.
that I've had experience of, and your dad has experience of, flying in a light aircraft. When you're doing that, and I've done that many years ago, not that recently, sadly, you really need to concentrate on
Mm,
everything that you're doing. It's a very full-on activity. Everything else in your brain goes. And I used to
mm,
say to people when describing the feeling that the minute you leave the ground, you leave all your worries behind because
mm.
you're just focused on what you're doing.
Well, like mentioning my dad, he's also a scuba diver. So I think that also makes sense because for me, I tried scuba diving like 2 times in my life.
Uh-huh.
Never again. It just freaked me out so much because when you are actually underwater, you are like, oh my gosh, am I breathing? Like, do I have the oxygen tank? Like, will I die here?
Mm.
And I'm like, yeah, it will make you forget about everything else. But at the same time, I can't really relax if I'm thinking about if my oxygen tank will be enough and if I will die. So that's probably an extreme hobby as well.
I guess so. I've never tried it. But then on the other hand, there are the kinds of hobbies that you can do where you find it somehow very relaxing, but at the same time it gives you time to sort out your brain, to close some of those
Mm,
tabs and to just sort out some of the bureaucracy. What I'm thinking about here is a hobby of mine is cooking. And every day for an hour, every evening, normally between 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock, I just spend an hour by myself in the kitchen cooking. I will have music on, but I'm alone with my thoughts normally. Occasionally, I have somebody in the kitchen with me who once joined me while I was cooking.
But I was always polite about it. I always asked, I was like, do you want a company or not? I always asked
I'm
because I get it.
quite happy to have someone on there but normally that's not really an option. So I'll be there for an hour and it's just very peaceful and relaxing, and I'm very, again, there's a degree of your brain has got to be focused because you're making food. You've got to actually think a little bit here and there. There's a bit of brain involved, but a lot of the time you can just be sort of relaxed.
Yeah.
And some hobbies are more physical than others, which obviously that's a good thing as well. If you play
Mm,
sport, I spent many years
mm.
playing football, for
For
example.
me, it doesn't really work when it gives me space to think. Because if I have a minute to think, I will. Unfortunately, I can't really turn that off. So if I'm about to really relax, at least for a while, I need to be thinking about something else. That's why writing works so well for me because every single tab in my brain is about writing. It's about grammar, it's about characters, and like I think that people who are not writers will never understand this, but it takes so many different thoughts to write a single sentence. You have to think about point of view, about the setting, about the grammar, about if it fits the character, about if it's, important for the book. And so if you focus on all of these things, you can't think about your own troubles and crises. But, for example, when I'm cooking, I need to listen to something. I need to listen to a podcast and force my brain to listen to the podcast and focus on what they are saying, because otherwise, when I'm left with my thoughts, that's not good. But I also think, because I'm not always like that, and I think that's, sort of what you are doing, that sometimes when you are fine with confronting the things that are in your head, it can be so helpful. And I'm usually like that because I'm someone who is very self-aware, and I am my own therapist. I'm always like, girl, why do you feel like that? And I'm ready to think about it. Unfortunately, lately, that's not the case. So I'm doing anything I can just not to be in my own head. And therefore, some things work and some things don't.
My question is, have we created more possibilities for micro crises? Did you call it earlier? Microstress. Than perhaps there were, going back 50, 60 years before the age of digital technology. Has the multitude of platforms created a multitude of microstressors? And if so, how do we get rid of them? In Australia, for example, just recently, in the last few weeks, they've banned social media from everybody under 16, I think, which is really
15 maybe.
yeah, something like that.
Yeah, but for young
Yeah,
adults or like young teenagers, yeah.
and kids, let's face it,
Yeah.
kids from I don't know what age are using devices. So I
Mm.
mean, that's quite extreme. So I'm just wondering about that, and then comparing it to, for instance, my analog childhood, where growing up in English middle class society, if you had problems, it was always well, mustn't grumble, don't just keep it together, don't complain about stuff. That was the attitude. You don't let it out. Whereas now, you were talking earlier about how you and your friends and your age group are now much better at communicating what is stressing them. Is that a better thing, or is that the old-fashioned English keep a stiff upper lip?
Well, it's certainly not that, because that's what I grew up with, and it's certainly not that. That's something I actually love about my generation, how we just do talk about these things. And I am this type of person who, I mean, with certain people, obviously, you can't tell everyone everything, but I'm very open about these things. But going back to, just briefly, because that's not the topic, but going back to the ban of social media, I don't know. Like, I started having social media in 2015. So I was 11. So 11, 12. So actually, think about it now, I was quite young. And I knew about it because I remember I was hiding it from my mom. And then she discovered it accidentally because she logged into Facebook, and it showed her like if she wants to add me into her friends. And she came to me, she was like, "You have Facebook?" I was like, "Maybe." How do you know? So I think I was a bit young. But nowadays with the ban, I'm not sure how it will work, to be honest, because I feel like you have just so many options to just overcome it. And I feel like children or young people will still find a way to be online. But I don't know. I don't think, from this point of view, from the point of view of microstressors and like social media effects, I don't think it's a fully bad thing, because as I'm saying, like, you can learn so many things on social media. Especially nowadays when people are talking about taboo topics that usually you may be asked, your parents about, but not everyone has that kind of relationship with their parents. So you can learn online without having to be embarrassed about it, which I think is really good. But the main reason why it was banned, and I learned that while listening to a true crime podcast, was because in Australia, the danger of, young people getting involved with like pedophiles and predators got really high.
Mm-hmm.
And it was obviously through social media. So that was the bigger reason why they've done it. And obviously that's great. But, going back You said something that like if these micro stresses are like today thing, they aren't. They are just different. Nowadays you can have all these micro stresses from yes, social media and online world, but I don't know, hundreds of years ago, you were stressed about if your vegetable is growing well and if you will have something to eat or if someone will steal from your garden. I don't know. You will always have everyday stresses to worry about. And it just changes with
Yeah.
the time, but they are still there. So I don't think it's a modern thing. We are just talking about it now.
I think with all these soft life crises that each individual, we need to sort of have mechanisms to deal with them. And
Mm.
that mechanism might be talking to your best friend, saying, guess what? This is really getting me down. I've just got too many tabs open in my brain or whatever. Or in addition to that, just try to identify those problems that you can do nothing about. Don't let them
Mm.
get to you because you can do nothing about them. So any stressing that you do about it, any worrying about something that you have no control over, is pointless.
I mean, you are the therapist, unfortunately for you. But, it's so funny how we were talking about that, it all accumulates and then suddenly you look like something is wrong. And I've been going through all of these things for months and you only noticed recently. You who know me so well and we talk like quite often. You only noticed recently and you had no idea for months because what was I supposed to tell you? It wasn't important until it was.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good point and a good quote. All research shows that as you get older, don't try not to become isolated. You need to be, interacting with people. It helps you to stay younger. It helps your mental health and your physical health.
Easier said than done, to be
Exactly,
fair.
exactly. So if you
I'm only
know,
21 and my circle is non-existent. I have like 1.5 friends. So
mm,
you are the half,
oh,
by the way.
I look like a half. Thank you for that. But I was about to say if you're listening now to this podcast, and you know somebody old, go and visit them or give them a call or at least send them a WhatsApp message. That's what Misha does for me.
Do you call our friendship a charity?
No, I was just making light. But, it is one of the important ways to cope with stress is being
Also,
interactive with other people.
for that matter, because I love to be the devil's advocate and I love to go against everything you say.
Of course.
Yes, do that. Just, only if it's good for you as well. Because I feel like what you just said is something that so many people feel like they have to do, especially when they have, parents or grandparents. And they're like, yeah, I have to be around them so they're not lonely, blah, blah. If it doesn't feel good for you and if it's ruining you, I don't want to sound cruel, but from my own experience, if I got to spend time with certain parts of my family, that would be literally my last straw, my last reason. It would probably make them feel better. It would make me feel so much worse.
Mm.
So, and it would be another micro stressor that I don't need in my life. But I know what you mean and I get it. But also, I'm the devil's advocate here.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
fine with
Well,
it.
now, to use another English idiom, swings and roundabouts. Have you heard that one?
No.
It's swings and roundabouts. It means that some things work for some people and some things don't. So some people
Yeah,
like swings, some people like roundabouts.
that makes perfect sense.
Some people
Okay.
like both.
Okay.
But yeah, it's true. It's sometimes what makes you feel good. If it feels good, do it. If it doesn't, don't. How about that?
Yeah, yeah. It's actually from a song. Am I being the one who quotes a song instead of you? And I have no idea what the song is, so it's not even valid. But there is you probably don't know that song. It's some probably like pop song. I really don't know. I just remember the one sentence that says, "If it doesn't feel good, what are you doing it for?"
You quoted a song. I want to quote a song. to
Go on.
wrap this all up, I'm going to quote from a song by Canadian rocker Neil Young, who has been part of my musical life since probably 1970, I should think, maybe even earlier. And in the early bands that I was playing in myself, where we would do a lot of cover versions of other people's songs, it played so many Neil Young songs, so many, including the one I'm going to quote from. The song I'm quoting from is a song called On the Beach, from 1974, from his album also called On the Beach. This was the title track. And he wrote this line and I'm reading it here: though my problems may be meaningless, that don't make them go away. And I can remember we actually, in the band I was playing at the time, we did that song. And I just remember, when we would play it, that so resonated with me because, yeah, you have loads of problems. We all do that are
Yeah.
meaningless, really, if you break them down. But it doesn't make them go away. It doesn't make it any less stressful. So
Yeah.
go and have a listen to the song because it's very, and I'm talking to listeners here, but you as well if you want. And it's quite a reflective song where he's debating this issue that he has with, being a star rock performer, and yet at times finding it very intrusive, having people watch his every move and
Mm.
his life, that he doesn't have the privacy that you would have if you're not a rock star. So it's kind of a debate song, him debating with himself. And it kind of sums up what we've been talking about, all
Yeah.
your problems may be meaningless, but that doesn't make them go away.
Yeah. I always say, to people when they talk about how, their problems are not that big, I always say that just because other people's problems are bigger doesn't mean that your biggest one is not important because it's your biggest problem, no matter what other people are dealing with.
Anyway, I will put a link in the episode description. So wherever you're listening to this episode, check out the description again. You'll find a link to the song. It might be a nice way to wrap up your listen for this particular episode. And while you're there, don't forget to do that really important thing. Leave us a like and subscribe. And I'm now getting, more and more people are sending me comments, and I do respond to every single one. I tend to be the one seeing these for some reason more than Michelle, but Michelle will respond to anything that you send to her directly. But that's it for this particular episode. So we'll wrap it up there.
Yeah, and we will see you next week, hopefully, with less problems.